Welcome to Free for All. I'm Miles Anderson.
And I'm Ken Cummins. Tonight our subject is the Nation of Islam and its entrance into politics, a new direction for this movement. And joining us on stage is Dr. Abdul Alim Muhammad. You're the national spokesman for Minister Farrakhan, and I guess you're the second in command in the chain of command of the Nation of Islam. And you're also a congressional candidate in Prince George's County. And with next to you is George X. Cure, legal counsel to the Nation of Islam, active in the Dope Busters program, and a candidate for Congress in the District of Columbia. Before we get into the politics...
Before we do, if I can...
You want to correct my introduction?
I want to correct a little point in your introduction. I am a national spokesman for Minister Farrakhan, but that does not translate as being second in command. I know that was put in the Post article.
Yeah, I guess we're going on the history here that Minister Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan, was national spokesman for Elijah Muhammad, and then he became the head of the Nation of Islam, and so you're now in that position. And
well, of course, Malcolm X was national spokesman, and before I became national spokesman, there were other individuals who were national spokesmen.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Nation of Islam. Most people, I don't think, are aware of exactly what the religion is and what it has done and what you're trying to do now.
Well, the Nation of Islam is an organization that is religious. And as such, it is not really the Nation of Islam that is fielding candidates. We are members of the Nation of Islam who are seeking political office. But the primary mission of the Nation of Islam is to seek the salvation and redemption of our people who were enslaved for centuries here in North America. And as a result of that enslavement, we lost the knowledge of self, we lost our culture, our history, our names, we lost our religion. And so the Nation of Islam's mission is to reunite black people with themselves, so to speak, so that we once again can play our role in world history.
But it's always been a separatist movement, right? Until, or maybe it still is, but it always preached, the Nation of Islam stayed out of the civil rights movement, had nothing to do with it. Said black separatism was really the answer. Are you abandoning that now with your entrance into politics, or are you still a separatist movement?
Well, again, we were the victims of a lot of propaganda. We wanted to be with the civil rights leaders. They called themselves, at the time of the March on Washington in '63, the Big Six. Well, they should have been the Big Seven. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the early '60s called for a united black front. And we believed always that it was going to take a multifaceted approach to the problem to get the results that we desire. But we were not included. And the separatism is an ultimate solution to the problem between blacks and whites. In other words, as human beings, we have a right to full and complete freedom, justice, and equality. If we can get that under present governmental arrangements, then there's no need to talk about separation. On the other hand, if after fully testing this American system, and we find that it is impossible for black people to be granted freedom, justice, and equality, we reserve the right to establish a separate state or territory of our own to give ourselves freedom, justice, and equality. So that's an ultimate, at the outer limit solution if all else fails.
On that, Dr. Muhammad, the Nation of Islam is certainly perceived by most Americans as being anti-Semitic. That's one of the charges that has been leveled against the Nation of Islam. Reverend Farrakhan has mentioned the Jews in his speeches many times. And yet, from what I understand about your campaign, you're going to be seeking the support of Christians, Jews, and all other religious groups. How can you reconcile the speeches of Reverend Farrakhan with your political goals?
I don't think there's any need to reconcile what Minister Farrakhan has actually said on the public record concerning any group with what we're trying to do politically, because I don't think anyone could show in what he actually said one iota of racism or anti-Semitism or bigotry. Now, what has been reported and what has been distorted of what he said.
You think it's been taken out of context?
Of course. You see, you find in print sometimes that he called Judaism
a dirty religion.
A dirty religion. He never said anything like that at all. He was talking about Zionism, and he was talking about the fact that people are using a religious veneer to cover up what is basically a political ideology called Zionism. Mm-hmm. And we are certainly anti-Zionist, but we are not anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Muslims, just to clarify a little bit further, we are people who believe in all of the prophets. We believe in all of the revealed scriptures.
Exactly.
So we could never dishonor Moses and the Torah or those who follow Moses and the Torah. We respect them and accept them for being possessors of the revealed wisdom of God.
But something you said let me bring up something you said. When Marion Barry was under attack, you said, "Don't bow down to the Jews. You will be perceived as weak." Why did you use the Jews? Why didn't you say, "Don't bow down to the Catholics, don't bow down to the Rotary Club"? Why are the Jews always sort of the symbol of...
Well, I met with Mr. Barry, and I extended to him my personal invitation to attend our Savior's Day convention in October. He told me, he said, "Dr. Muhammad," he said, "I would love to come, but if I show up there, these," and I'm using the mayor's words, "these damn Jews will crucify me, and I'm in enough trouble as it is." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Mr. Mayor," I said, "I believe that I have the pulse beat of the people. If you stand and fight, the people will be with you. But if you bow down to the Jews, then the people will hate you." If he had told me it was the Puerto Ricans who would crucify him, if he had told me it was the Chinese people who would crucify him, I would have used that term. And so I was only responding to the dilemma that the mayor was faced with.
Okay. Let's bring George into this here. You're running for Congress in the District of Columbia. What is your campaign? How do you perceive that if you were in Congress, you would be a different kind of representative for the people?
Well, George, ex-curable believes he would be different in that I'm not bound by the politics of a party, whether it be the Democratic or the Republican Party. One of the dilemmas that we face in Congress and in the nation is that the congresspersons have so many allegiances, whether those allegiances are to political action committees, lobbying groups, special interest groups, or other kinds of interests, that many of them have shown that they are willing to make decisions based upon narrowly defined self-interest. And as a result, the whole country has suffered. We see the S&L crisis. We see all of the scandals that are breaking out throughout our nation where all Americans are suffering. Well, someone has to ask the question, what were the congressional leaders doing? They were obviously asleep on their watch, or they had no interest in revealing the reality of what is going on in the nation to the American population, because somehow somebody is restraining them, or they are being restrained by their own self-interest. So I come as a representative free with the ability to speak the truth and to present to the American people the true facts as a congressperson and as a legislator, to advocate for the things that I believe most of Americans want.
Mr. Cure, as a member of the Nation of Islam, aren't you basically constrained by the tenets of your faith? Isn't your allegiance to the teachings of Muhammad rather than to any temporal or any fleeting pressures of business, or perhaps even the desires of your constituents? Aren't you constrained somewhat in your actions by your religious teachings?
If you were in office, is what you're saying.
Well, I don't see that. I think that on the aspect of religion, it is a freeing aspect. It's freeing because I can be truthful. I can really concern myself with what any religion really should concern itself with and professes to concern itself with, which is the upliftment of the human being, restoring human potential. And we have talked about a government by, of, and for the people, which means that the role of government should be the upliftment of the human condition when it is suffering. So in that aspect, it's very complementary. And let us also be mindful. We have a Pledge of Allegiance that says what? That we pledge allegiance to the flag, but to the republic of which it stands, one nation under God. So we say that. The president, whenever he makes his address to the nation, always talks about God. On the dollar bill, it says, "In God we trust." So let us be fair and honest about the reality that we can't take God out of the equation. He is in it. Politics as an entity deals with the question of dealing with the needs of human beings. Well, you're not going to be able to deal with those needs if you are not able to go and provide the resources from the bounty of the earth to solve the problems of the people. So to me, it's very consistent and complementary with what we have to do. So I'm freer to do it than most are.
Well, now in your campaign, now you've announced that you are dropping out of the Democratic primary, and you're going to run as an independent in November. And the reason you're dropping out of the Democratic primary is because there's 6 black candidates and 1 white, and you're fearful that the blacks will split up the vote and elect the white, and that this white woman, Betty Ann Kane, should not be the congressman for the District of Columbia. Now, why is that? Just because she's white, or because of her issues?
Well, I would say this. First of all, my statement, if you studied my press release, I raised the issue of us being concerned about our own enlightened self-interest. I was speaking directly to a discussion that has existed in the black community since the campaign began. So this really was more of a family discussion, that it had been raised and talked about in public. No one obviously made a decision to move forward on it. As an intelligent person and being concerned more with the question of leadership in Washington, and a leadership that does reflect a cross-section, and especially the majority of the citizens in the city, I took what was an appropriate move. And I have found that many have come to me and said that they appreciated the principled stand that I took, because there is that legitimate concern. Now, with regard to Ms. Kane, the paper has interpreted it as an attack on Ms. Kane. I looked at it as a concern of a community who was concerned about political empowerment. That is how I see the question. And I raised the question of what the records show. If you study the 10-year history in the District of Columbia, you find that black people have shown themselves to be mature enough to elect whites to office in a citywide manner, even when there are other blacks in the race. But when you study that same voter pattern among the white voters, you find that they in large vote on a racially polarized line. That's a fact. So I looked at that fact and analyzed that in relationship to the numbers and thought that that was the best and the proper decision.
Is that really a fact, though? I mean, we have a white candidate running for mayor, Dave Clark, who's not, you know, he's considered a long shot at best. Marion Barry won in '78 because he put together the coalition of sort of the white progressive liberals and blacks in certain segments of the community, but not the whole black community. Much of the black community went for Walter Washington back then. Well, so, I mean, it's not really the fact that whites don't vote for blacks.
Well, no, let me correct you on that. That's actually not true. If you study the numbers of the 1978 election, the mayor did receive a good portion of the Ward 3 vote and other white citizens' votes, but it was not as substantial as you may be led to believe. As well as along with the black voters, they did not as well go along with Walter Washington. They actually split 3 ways between the mayor, between Walter Washington, and between Mr. Tucker.
Right.
So there was actually a balance among those 3, and the mayor did get a good portion, but also Mr. Washington got a fair portion of the white liberal vote. But I understand your point. What you're really bringing up is the question of white voter patterns. It is clear that white voters vote according to their own enlightened self-interest. They felt that Mr. Berry represented that. After Mr. Berry was elected, the very next year, they did an about-face and in mass did not vote for Mr. Berry because they did not feel that he represented their interests.
The next election.
And they have continued to do that since that time. And the same with Mr. Clark and Ms. Kane. They have continued to vote in mass, upwards of 80 to 90% for Mr. Clark and Ms. Kane. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the black side, they have split. And Ms. Kane has gotten good portions of black voters in different wards, even over some of the black candidates. So we have shown our ability to be mature. I'm just pointing out a reality that does exist.
I'd like to ask what I hope is going to be a difficult question. As regards Mayor Barry and his tribulations of the last several months, I know that the Nation of Islam has come out in support of Mayor Barry. Certainly you were at his rally yesterday. Mayor Barry is accused of a lot of activities which would be impossible to reconcile with most religious teachings, probably of any of the major religious groups. Are you in danger of having to compromise your religious principles in order to affect a political power base? Do you have to compromise to get into the structure, to buy your part of the power?
Not at all. Not any more than Jesus, for example, was compromised when he went to publicans and sinners. You know, we don't condone the sin. Many of the activities that Mr. Barry has admittedly been involved in are not good. We don't condone them. We don't uphold them as things that are good for our children to learn.
But don't you, by your presence and by your support, send that message? Aren't you afraid that they'll get that
message? No, the message that is being sent loud and clear is the message of redemption.
And forgiveness.
And forgiveness. That here is a sinner that has turned from his sinfulness and who is seeking the forgiveness of God. And as his brother, I have to extend my hand to help him up out of the ditch that he's in and do my level best to prevent him from returning to the ditch. Now, you know, that's the spiritual stance, and I believe that is the message. Look, listen, in Washington, D.C., there are 76,000 registered drug addicts and hundreds of thousands of alcoholics. And so if we condemn Mr. Barry for his drug problem and his alcoholism and say that he should be consigned to the rubbish heap, well, then we're saying that about a significant portion of our citizens. I would rather give the message to 76,000 other drug addicts and hundreds of thousands of alcoholics that even though you have this problem, here's an example of a man who is coming up from that problem and who is attempting to get his life together and to make a further contribution for the sake of the city.
But let me say this, if you would, please, on that question, because I think it's critical. We also have to be reminded that if we're going to be compassionate, then we should be compassionate across the board. When Miss Dukakis, Kitty Dukakis, had her problem, no one jumped all over her, and she is in a position of leadership by virtue of her relationship. No, everyone had compassion for that. Everyone had compassion for Miss Betty Ford when she had her problem. No one has jumped over and on top of Senator Edward Kennedy for his admitted problems, nor did they jump on Tip O'Neill, who everyone knew he had a drinking problem. So if we can show compassion to others in that respect, then why can't we as a community who preach forgiveness, who preach redemption, who preach compassion, can't seem to find it where it concerns Mayor Marion Barry? And that has been our stand. And the people of the city of Washington, believe me, many have said that it's sent a bad example to the citizens of the city. The black children in the city, they understand that. And if you read the Washington Post on Sunday, the 12th of August, you would see that an interview was done with little children. And the news reporters were asking the little children what they felt. And the children said, we know what he did was not right, but we also forgive him. And so this is the feeling of the citizens of the city. And this is a correct posture. Right. And that is why we take the stand, because we know it's the right position.
But you're saying forgiveness is one thing. You're saying, you said you think that Marion Barry should run for mayor again. And you're saying that our politicians are beholden to special interests. Well, Marion Barry, when he was in office, got every special interest contribution there was. And forgive is one thing, but should we put him back in the same office? Why put him back in that?
Well, I think that he should run because he's the most experienced person for that job. I think that he has made many notable contributions to senior citizens, to youth. He's done a lot for the minority business community. And so if, in fact, he is a reformed individual, and only he and God knows for sure what is in his heart, then I think that, as we said, as we find in the scripture concerning the prophet Job, that his latter days will be greater than his former days.
I guess that's the crux of it there. I mean, a lot of people look at this and say he had no choice but to play the role of repentant sinner. That was the only option left to him to try to beat this trial.
But that's so
is it sincere?
Exactly, it is cynical.
It's so
But he's a
cynical.
journalist.
But is it
Yeah.
sincere? How do you know it's sincere?
Well, then let's put him to the test, you see. Rather than trying unknown persons of no experience in the office of mayor, I believe in giving people a chance to show that they, in fact, have repented and that they are willing to make amends. I don't think that if we put it on the balance, that we would find that Mayor Barry has done more evil than good. I think he's done more good than evil. And so he deserves the benefit of the doubt. Put it before the voters. They would be the ultimate jury.
Well, let me ask another cynical question then. Everybody wanted the Barry machine, you know, every candidate in this race. And you, Minister Farrakhan, embraced, who stands up and preaches against, you know, the bankruptcy, moral bankruptcy, or our political leaders, has embraced Barry as what you said is a repentant sinner who should be given another chance. How much was this attempt by the Nation of Islam candidates to get the Barry machine?
I don't think we're that cynical. You know, Jesus was sent into the world not to condemn the people for their sins, but to save them from their sins. And I think that Minister Farrakhan's entrance into the D.C. political maelstrom, if you will, in June, was to come to the aid of a man who needed aid. And in bringing a healing balm to Mr. Barry, the individual, and to Mrs. Barry and Christopher Barry, to heal that family, he also, in effect, brought a healing balm to the entire city. And I think that that was the motivation. If there are political spin-offs, well, then they are just there. And we, as much as anyone, hope to take advantage of that. But I would just say, in a most uncynical way, that our basic motivation in what we're doing is to sincerely try to help people who need help.
And I would say this on that question as well. Certainly the motivation was as Dr. Muhammad said. But I find it always interesting that if it had have been purely politically motivated, those who are political scientists would have applauded the move. But we're being sitting here questioned in a cynical way when if you were a political scientist, although that was not the motivation, people would be saying, my God, that was such a intelligent move on their part.
Brilliant tactical maneuver.
Brilliant tactical move for them to do that. Although that was not our motivation. Minister Farrakhan is a man of God. He did the principle thing, and we stood with the mayor on principle, not having anything to do at all with politics.
Okay, well, let's get away from Marion Barry for a while. Yeah. But it is hard, you know. I mean, you're Minister Farrakhan. We're in an arena here now where we really have three sort of political giants: Minister Farrakhan, and you being a part of that, Marion Barry, and Jesse Jackson. Now, I've gone to Farrakhan rallies where Jesse Jackson is described as a weak-kneed, cocktail-sipping Uncle Tom. What is your impression of Jesse Jackson, and what is he doing in Washington?
Well, I think Reverend Jackson is someone that we feel a great debt of gratitude towards. Keep in mind that in 1984, Reverend Jackson lifted the aspirations of all black people in his bid for the presidency.
Right.
And in fact, it was Reverend Jackson who opened the door for Minister Farrakhan and encouraged Minister Farrakhan to grant media interviews that brought him national and international attention.
That's the first time a lot of us ever heard of Minister Farrakhan.
And obviously in Prince George's County, Reverend Jackson busted up the county, so to speak. He carried the county in '84 and in '88. So in my bid to become the congressman from the 5th Congressional District in Maryland, I have a great debt of gratitude to Reverend Jackson. Now, there were some things that were done in '84 and in '88 for political expediency that seemed to be to the detriment of Minister Farrakhan and to the Nation of Islam. But we understand political expediency. And we understand that beyond political expediency, there are overarching concerns and interests, and as Reverend Jackson himself would say it, there's common ground on which we can all stand.
So there
and
is
that's what we're seeking, that common ground.
with Jesse.
With Jesse Jackson, with Mayor Barry, with all of the players in this political game.
But
So-
Ken, let me say this. I
Go ahead.
have to correct your statement. I've been at all the rallies that Minister Farrakhan has been in Washington, and as many as I could throughout the nation. Minister Farrakhan has never singled out Reverend Jesse
No,
Jackson.
this wasn't Mr.
And wait a minute,
Farrakhan.
let me finish. And never made a characterization of Reverend Jesse Jackson as such. In fact, all of the statements that Minister Farrakhan has made concerning the Reverend Jackson that I recall had to do with the way in which the government treated Reverend Jackson and his candidacy. And so, let's just be clear on the record, and if you're going to make that statement, then identify the speaker of the statement.
Matter of fact,
You remember that, don't you? That was at the
Well,
Shiloh Baptist Church on August 1st last year for the rally for Alcee Hastings. You were one of the speakers, and it wasn't Minister Farrakhan, but it was one of the speakers that preceded him. I think it was either Alton
No, I think it
Maddox
was,
or
well,
Reverend Al
who
Sharpton.
is not a member of the nation.
Right, so let's paint it correctly.
Now, and in all due fairness, I, in fact, made a very critical comment concerning Reverend Jackson at a certain point about a year and a half ago. And Minister Farrakhan called me to task and said that that was a statement, that was not representative of his feelings concerning Reverend Jackson. And so I think Minister Farrakhan and Reverend Jackson, have a very good relationship, and we're not going to allow anyone to drive a wedge, to make it seem that we're on opposite ends
Right.
of some political spectrum.
You're both running for Congress, and so we'd like to, I know we've concentrated a lot on politics here, but as congressional candidates, what do you think of what's going on in the Mideast now and President Bush's response to Iraq?
Well, I think that what is going on in the Mideast today is what you get as a result of decades of an uneven, unjust, unfair policy towards the Mideast situation.
America's policies?
Yes. You see, when all of the benefit and all of the aid goes to Israel, and then some aid goes to Egypt, but all of the other parts of the region are not attended to properly, then you get imbalances that become intolerable, and then people like Saddam Hussein make moves which get everybody in trouble. What I favor is a revisiting, if you will, of the entire Mideast situation, where, in fact, we understand that the keystone to peace in that region is going to be economic development that touches all of the citizens of the Mideast, whether they're Christians or Jews or Muslims, and that all of the nations begin to share in the great vitality, human vitality, spiritual vitality, economic resources of the region. Then we'll have peace.
Okay,
Now,
we're
Ken,
almost out of time. George, I want you to answer that.
On that, in addition to what Dr. Muhammad has said, now it's my turn to be cynical. I have great concern about what is being reported, because the reality is the true facts of the situation have really not been brought to light. I know what the President has said. I know what the interpreters who have interpreted Mr. Saddam Hussein's people have said that he has said. But to be honest, let's remember Grenada and what was said. Let us remember Panama and what was said. Let us remember Libya and what was said. So again, I have to say that in my judgment, the true facts have not been presented and have not been known. And one of the things I intend to do in Congress is to really present those true facts.
Okay, real quickly, do you disagree with what President Bush has done?
Well, what I'm saying to you is that
You think it was done on false information is what you're saying, right?
Well, I think the time will show that. I'm just simply saying that at this point, I think that it's very hypocritical of the president to talk about Saddam Hussein when he goes and bombs Panama, when he goes and bombs Grenada during the Reagan years. So I think that we need to just stop the hypocrisy, and if he's going to jump in and try to hold up this banner of freedom for all, then why don't he start being fair and just right here?
I hate to cut you off, but I'm sure we're out of time. I've already gotten the signal. I want to thank you, Dr. Muhammad and George X. Cure. Good luck in your campaigns, and that's it for this week. We'll see you next time on Free for All.